I'm Ryan Beal, who will be presenting on his paper, The Strain of Success, Injury Risk Mitigation, and Team Success in Soccer.
Perfect. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Hi. I'll be presenting our paper, The Strain of Success, a predictive model for injury mitigation and team success in soccer. So I'm Ryan Beal. I'm CEO and co-founder of a startup in the UK called Sentient Sports, which is focused around AI. The main author of this paper is Greg Everett. Unfortunately, he was unable to travel to Boston today, so he's recorded a number of videos to explain some of the models throughout the presentation. So we'll start the presentation today with a bit of a background. We'll then go through the model framework, and we'll finish with some key findings. So this paper was motivated by the need for better care and protection of athletes during busy and congested fixture schedules. So last season, during the FIFA World Cup, it was during the winter, and this led to unprecedented fixture congestion, which meant post-Winter World Cup, there was a 71% increase in the severity of injuries. So this led to some record figures in terms of financial cost of injuries, which was up to nearly $770 million across the big 5 European leagues, up 30% from the season before. So this continued into this season with a 15% increase in the first 3 months of the Premier League. So it's really highlighting an urgent need for some new modelling in this area, with clubs looking to utilise their best players for longer and athletes looking to prolong their careers. So this motivated the research, and we came up with a model that's able to identify periods where we can rest players without needing to sacrifice the on-pitch success. So I'll now go over the model framework at a high level, and then we'll dive into more details throughout the presentation. So we start with a team in a game week looking to plan for an upcoming schedule of games. Each team has got a squad of players across different position groups, and in our model, each player has got a player skill rating and an injury probability for the upcoming game. And both of these come from models, which we'll come on to later. The next phase is a optimization to select the optimal 11 for an upcoming game. So to do this, we use a Monte Carlo tree search, which simulates forward a number of game weeks to identify a probability distribution of different outcomes that can happen, both in terms of injuries and in terms of expected points. So we have another model for expected points, so we can assess how important each game is across a season. We then progress forward to the next game state, update based on any injuries that may have occurred and the utilization of the players. This is then repeated as we go through game week by game week. So next we'll talk a bit around our player injury model, and Greg will talk about this in his first video.
Over a season, a key element of team selection is the management of player injury risks, and player workload must be controlled to reduce these risks. Our example in the slide demonstrates the expectation that when a player is rested, the reduction in workload leads to a reduced injury risk. However, the manager must find the optimal time to rest these players to not risk on-field performance, as we address later in our model. For this work, we train an XGBoost model on injury-related features curated from a 2017-18 English Premier League dataset and a historic career injuries dataset, and use this model to predict player injuries. When injuries occur during our team selection framework, we sample player injury durations from a Gaussian distribution fitted to our real-world injury dataset. Diving deeper into how the injury probability model is incorporated into our framework, for an example player D, who has an upcoming match against Watford, we collect features regarding their workload, which we compute using our previous team selections from past games, the player's injury history, such as their age or the number of injuries they've had, and also wider features such as the opponent or the travel distance to the match. These features are passed through the XGBoost model and are used to predict the injury risk for that player.
So we can next look at the feature contribution that the model has by using SHAP values. So the first set of features that contribute to the model are more contextual, so things like traveling to the game and a little bit about rain. The next set, which contributes slightly more, are things like the day since the last injury of the player, as well as the game day temperature and the player's age. And then finally, the features that contribute most are things like the player's workload across games, both in the short and near term, and then also the player detailed injury history. So next we'll talk a bit around the reward function and how we use this to inform our model.
we compute the expected points for a team in a match using an adaptive Meyer prediction model to predict win-draw-loss probabilities. The Meyer model is commonly used in soccer prediction models today and assumes that team scoring rates follow a Poisson distribution, as demonstrated using the scoring distribution histogram shown on the slide now, which are extracted from real-world English Premier League data. With the use of Poisson-based regression, the attacking and defensive strengths of teams are learned from past data and used to predict match outcome probabilities. However, the original Meyer model focuses on a team level and doesn't factor in individual player selections. Therefore, to factor in individual player selections, we modify the Meyer model by replacing team identity features with numeric player-based features. More specifically, we use a player contribution model called VAPE on historic data to represent player skill values, as can be shown on the numbers below player shirts on the slide now. Combined player skills are then used to supplement our Meyer model so that we can incorporate the starting 11 for each team and use this to compute match outcome probabilities, which we can convert to the expected points for the match. When testing our adaptive Meyer model over 2 seasons of English Premier League data, we have found that it achieves similar performance within error boundaries to the original Meyer model, whilst providing additional flexibility in measuring match outcomes based on the individual player selections for that match.
So now we'll go on to the final stage of our framework, which is the optimization model we use to minimize injuries while maximizing the success of the team during that period.
We frame the soccer team selection problem as a Markov decision process, or MVP, meaning that we mathematically model manager decision making. The manager's objective is to maximize the expected points for the team for the season by strategically balancing the chances of success in upcoming games with the risk of key player injuries. Due to the complexity of the decision space in its many actions and possible future injuries, we use Monte Carlo tree search, or MCTS, to approximate optimal team selections. MCTS is a tree-based search algorithm where nodes represent MDP states containing factors like the current game in the season, player injury risks, and existing injuries. Branches represent manager team selections, and leaf nodes represent the next game with updated player injuries. The probability of reaching a specific leaf node is influenced by the parent node and the selected team, and determined by a chance node. The first step of MCTS is selection, where actions are chosen from the current node until an unexplored node is reached, meaning not all possible actions have been explored from that node yet. For example, the bottom node of the tree on the slide here, where no teams have been chosen yet. During selection, actions are chosen based on a UCB heuristic, which balances exploring new actions with focusing on promising actions so far. Once an unexplored node is reached, we expand this node by selecting an action. We prioritize which actions we select first using a technique called progressive widening. Once we have selected an action, we simulate the rest of the season from that point and compute the total expected points. This expected points value is stored as the value for that new node. During simulation, we assume that the manager chooses the most skilled team for each match. Finally, this expected points value is backpropagated up the tree to the root, incorporating the season value and immediate rewards for each action at each game along the way. Therefore, the node value at a given game week reflects the total expected points from the season from that point until the end of the season. This single iteration of MCTS is repeated thousands to millions of times, exploring many possible team selections. The result is a recommendation for the manager based on the action with the highest expected value, striking a balance between immediate rewards and the probability of encountering future valuable nodes.
Thanks, Greg. So now we've been through our model framework, we'll now talk about how we tested the model. So we used some real-world data from StatsBomb. So it was their event-based data from the 17-18 and 18-19 Premier League seasons. For our career injury histories, we use transfermarket.com, and then for any wage data, we use Capology. So the first test we ran was on our injury risk model. So we tested this by using a 70-30 train test split across five-fold cross-validation. And when we did this, we found that we had a log loss of 0.16, which outperformed many of the other baseline models that we tested. We then compared what the model predicted to real world across the 18-19 Premier League season, which is shown on the slide. And we found that this had a Pearson correlation coefficient of 0.77, which then we deemed significant enough to use within the rest of our model framework.
We introduce a greedy approach to team selection as a comparator to our MCTS model over a season. At each game, the greedy model selects the team that maximizes the expected points for that game. This is a relatively simple model that focuses on short-term team performance without considering player injury probabilities and long-term player absences.
So the next test we ran was to compare the team selections made by our model to what was made by real-world managers. So when we did this, we found that our MCTS model had a similarity on average of around 76%. And then we did the same test for our greedy model and found that this was more similar to the real world with an 82% similarity. We believe this could be due to the short-term pressures that exist for real-world managers, meaning that they're more likely to prioritize short-term decision-making rather than focusing on long-term player welfare and protection. So next, we simulated thousands of times across each season to compare our MCTS and what the performance was against our greedy model. So the aim of this was to really show that we're able to reduce the injuries for both the squad and the optimal 11, while also maintaining the same amount of points as a greedy model was able to attain around expected points in each simulation. So when we do this, we find that Brighton in that Premier League season would have been the team with a squad injury decrease of 15.5% and an optimal 11 decrease of 23% for injuries, whilst maintaining similar points. Chelsea would have benefited least with an optimal 11 decrease of 7.5%, and then on average across all Premier League teams, we found that there would be a 4.6% decrease to the squad and a 13% decrease to the optimal 11, whilst maintaining similar expected points levels.
In our evaluation, we were keen to test the robustness of our model to ensure that it would add value in higher injury risk scenarios not seen in our testing data, where player welfare management is critical. This could be in an intense run of fixtures due to a cup run, or higher impact sports such as rugby or American football. Therefore, to test these different settings, we performed an experiment comparing standard injury risks to 2 times higher and 3 times higher injury risks. Again, we compared the performance of our MCTS model to the greedy baseline model. Our results showed that in higher injury risk scenarios, the MCTS model surpasses the greedy model in season performance, with a 1.8% increase in season expected points when injury risk is 3 times higher. Interestingly, as the injury probability increases, the injury reduction margin compared to the greedy baseline model decreases, which is likely due to the strategy being forced into certain decisions due to the many injuries. Despite this, injury frequency is still significantly reduced across all injury risk multipliers.
So the next test is related to what we said at the start of the presentation around injury-related costs totaling nearly $800 million last season. So we used Capology wage data to show how much teams could save by using our model in terms of the predicted injury wage cost reduction. So Brighton again would have been the most effective with a 22% reduction, and then on average an estimated reduction of 11% across all the Premier League clubs, which could save the teams millions a season. Our final test was looking at an individual athlete and how our model is able to reduce injury probability across the season by identifying optimal times to rest that player. So you can see here for N'Golo Kante, it keeps the injury probability lower throughout the season, with the exception of the run-in, where real-world Chelsea rested Kante, whereas our model decided to play him. So to summarise and conclude, we'll start with future works and limitations. So our model has been built with freely available and open source data, so it really provides a framework for how this type of analysis could work at a club. If a club was to use it in the real world, they'd have better access to medical data of the players, as well as training data using GPS from training data. We also didn't consider substitutions in our model, so we were only resting players for a whole game or not. So we'd like to extend the model and become more granular with our selection, so if a team was winning with half an hour left, then they could bring that player off. And then finally, we'd like to test our model robustness against more sports, so looking at high-impact sports like rugby and American football to see if it could still maintain the same results. So our key findings in our models was that we're able to show that we can reduce injuries by around 13% on average across Premier League teams, which leads to an 11% financial reduction in injury-related costs. We also found that real-world managers are more likely to make decisions focused on short-term gains rather than the long-term athlete protection that they may do if they weren't so worried about their job in the near term. To conclude, we've presented a model here that's able to optimize when to rest players across a season, which is able to then show teams that they can rest players and reduce injury risk without the need of sacrificing on-pitch success. And we hope that this could be used in the real world to have an impact on real-world teams and athletes. Thank you for listening.
So you're optimizing throughout the rest of a season, all the way to completion. So potentially 38, 39 games in EPL. Okay, this might be a little long-winded, I apologize. So in the US, we have this game called Survivor Pool, right? And you pick, each week of the NFL season, you pick a winner. Constrained to, you may only pick one team once per season. And the greedy approach is to pick all the best matchups earlier in the year, but then you paint yourself in a corner at the end of the year because you've used up all the good teams. And the matchups aren't good anymore. So more of a comment, I guess. I apologize. I want to hear what your thoughts are. It may be a lot better to only optimize through the next X games rather than the whole season, because those injuries are going to become realized, and then the coach now has this real actual information on who's available, and he can re-optimize and re-optimize. And you also, the player skill levels, the vape numbers, he'll have more information about which players have become better, become worse over time. So that's just my thought for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in the model, we have a parameter which allows us to set how many games forward we simulate. So you can do it till the end of the season when you run out of games to simulate, or you can set it into a 5-game window and you can progress that throughout the season. So yeah, definitely agree that that's something that can be tweaked and be a parameter in the model if it was to be implemented in the real world.
Thanks. So I think this is actually really clever, the way you're thinking about injury, because one of the challenges it's thinking about injury is we tend to look at one person and say, what's the probability that they get injured? And it's really hard to do that. And you've kind of allowed us to take use of averaging by doing this across the team. So you really can do this in a probabilistic sense. So I really like that, and I think everybody should think about that.
Thank you.
My question for you is, so in order to do that, you have to rely on the fact that your injury probability in the model is, as a function of something like player load and injury history, is pretty reliable.
Yeah.
So I guess my first question is, especially since this is publicly available data, how do you estimate player load?
Yeah, so we use the event data from StatsBomb across the season, so we can look at the number of events that a player's involved with, and we built another model which is able to then impute what the physical metrics would be from event data, because tracking data is still, as mentioned earlier on, it's still not widely available, especially not open source, so we just can't get hold of that data for academic work. But we've built another model which is referenced in the paper to impute that physical workload in games. But like I said, would be made a lot better by improving that model. It's where the biggest gains can be made if we worked with a team to have detailed player injury histories, where we knew if the players had a major ACL injury, or even ones that don't really get talked about in training where he's only missed a day. All of that could make a big difference to informing our model around workloads and injury histories.
And I guess just to follow up on that, so a player workload is a combination of what you guys see in the game and of training.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have any of the...
No training data at all.
So you don't know,
Yeah, we just wanted to show it as a framework for, like I said, being able to maintain that you can rest players while still maintaining performance on the pitch. So it's more of a framework for decision making rather than saying we're expert medical prediction model. That wasn't the core focus of the paper.
So you're looking for a volunteer team that will give you the real player
and then you've got to convince a manager to make the decisions based on it, which is another thing.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. No, I thought that was super interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just talking to Brian about this. I just want to add, first off, you did a really good job. I was impressed.
Thank you.
The one question is that I noticed obviously that you went ahead by just using more or less like Premier League, teams in the league.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, and if you covered this part, my apologies, but I'm just curious to know, with other leagues, whether it's, La Liga, MLS, if there are any other similarities, because case in point, here in America, North America, you have the NBA, that's it. you know, the NFL, that's it. But obviously with soccer being a global sport, you have multiple, you know, leagues and organizations. And I was just curious to know, was there any type of like digging with some of the other leagues in addition to like the Premier League to see if there was anything similar in what you saw?
Not at this stage. We haven't had any other data for other leagues, but it's something that we've built in a way that we can bring in other event data to be able to test across that. I think it'd be really interesting to test across women's sports as well and look at how that changed, especially
Right.
around the injury prediction model, because I think lots of the features would change, especially around importance. So yeah, definitely for future work, one we want to test in more leagues as well as on more sports as well.
Right, because I was going to ask about the NWSL as well, but
Yeah.
I think that's it. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.